Right, I'm the Eyes taxi driver. This, my friends, is Richard Solly.
Hello.
And Richard is from the London Mining Network. What's the London Mining Network, Richard?
Well, it's a group or an alliance of 31 different organisations, all of which are concerned in one way or another with the impacts of British-based or British-funded mining companies around the world. And the reason for it is so many of the world's mining companies, and especially the biggest ones, are listed on the London Stock Exchange, which means that, whether people know it or not, very often our money from our bank accounts, insurance policies, pension funds are going into these companies, which are often doing great damage elsewhere and messing up other people's livelihoods.
So I'm making this film called The War Machine, and I see the war machine as banks, oil and arms. And when I say oil, I mean all minerals, all resources. So we've got banks, oil and arms. That's debt, destruction and death. And how I see it is this: without the war machine, without debt, destruction and death, the global economy would collapse. On Monday I interviewed Natalie Bennett from the Green Party, and she said to me, at one point she went, we have to be careful with the mine, because so much of our economy depends on them. That was it. You know it. This is they have the world in a stranglehold.
Yes, that's true. And I think the thing is, okay, we need minerals. We're sitting in a car made out of metal. I cycled to work on a bicycle made out of metal. But the thing is, what we have to do is think more carefully about the way we use metals and energy resources, and find ways of using less stuff, doing more with less stuff, designing stuff better so that it can be reused or recycled more easily. So we reduce our use, we reuse more and we recycle more. That would reduce the supposed need for constantly expanding the mining frontier and creating new mines all over the place, often on the land of indigenous peoples or other land-based peoples whose livelihoods depends on that land.
Yeah, but I mean, talking about saying, we don't use so much metal, and that's something. But the destruction of the land, that is everything.
Yes.
This is everything.
And so much of it is brutal. It's not just destruction of land. It's the armed imposition of mining on people who don't want it. Sometimes in this country, when I meet somebody new and they ask me what I do and I mention the word mining, they ask about coal mining in Britain. And I don't want to be... most of the work that we do is supporting communities who don't want mining. That doesn't mean that we're against mine workers, for instance. And one of the ironies of the work that I've been doing, I've worked mostly on a mine in Colombia called Cerrejón, and that's a huge, great open-cast coal mine. It was when that was opening that the Thatcher government felt able to close down the British coal mining industry because they knew they could get cheap coal from Colombia. So here were communities in this country relying on mining, wanting mining, who were told, well, you can't have it anymore, and other communities in Colombia who did not want mining, who wanted to live by small-scale farming and fishing, who were told, tough, we're having a mine here. And they weren't just told it, they were forced off their land at the point of a gun. And that happens around the world. A mining project is declared and people are in the way, get pushed off their land by force, and often people who object to it are subjected to disappearance, extrajudicial killings, unreasonable imprisonment, or mass killings. So even in Greece, even in Europe at the moment, there's a company called Eldorado Gold, which is Canadian, but it's listed on the London Stock Exchange here. There are people there who do not want a massive open-cast gold mine with all the pollution that would cause, and they're campaigning against it at local level, and now 27 of them have been accused by the Greek government of terrorist offences, and they're using the same legislation that they've used to crack down on the neo-Nazi Golden Dawn movement, to crack down on people who are totally peacefully saying we don't want a gold mine here.
The war machine it's relentless. Their primary purpose is profit. It's about controlling the means of production. We could have solar panels, for instance, and get free energy, but that takes away the means of production. Now I interviewed Heinrich from from Indonesia, talking about Kalimantan, going and coal mining in rainforest, building a railway supported by this government, by HSBC, Barclays, Lloyds. Are they off their nuts?
Well, they go for short-term profit without having a long-term view about what it's going to do to the world and the people who come after us. That's part of the problem. Actually, now you mentioned solar panels, and I'm in favour of moving to renewable energy. But even with renewables, we have to remember that there's a destructive impact of the mining to get the stuff you need to build the solar panels or the wind farms.
But the whole coup should be that it's negotiable. Like you got in Mozambique, right? It is the poorest country in the world, bar none. 25-year war, people, struggling. But you've got gas fields down there. A guy called John Craven owns them, and he's selling them to Shell. And what, the government of Mozambique gets, 7% or something like that? It's ridiculous. Like, that money should be for their, if they have resources, that should be for their children, for their health, for their education. But that's because these companies are about profit and exploiting.
Yeah. And one of the reasons that London Mining Network came together in the first place in 2007 was that most of the groups who set it up were working in support of grassroots communities around the world who either had already been displaced by mining and were wanting to get some kind of justice out of it, or who were resisting mining coming onto their land in the first place. And in addition to making sure that the people of a country get whatever benefit there is from the mining, we also work very strongly to push for people's right to say no. If they don't want mining, then they shouldn't have to be subjected to it. And in the case of indigenous peoples, they have got the right in international law now, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Okay, I shouldn't say it's law, it's a declaration. But they have, in that declaration, it's recognised that they have the right to free, prior, informed consent before any big.
But they get around that. I mean, I know it's only small scale, but I was a witness to Balcom. Now, earlier on in the year, I spoke to a guy called Celestine Akobaro from Nigeria who was trying to explain to me. He said to me, "You do not understand what it means for an oil company to come into your area. The infrastructure needed." He said the roads are so wide. He said there are lorries after lorries after lorries. There are cranes. He said there are gas flares. He said you don't know what a gas flare is. It's going. He said as far as the eye can see, there are gas flares. There is a field. He said you can't. This takes over the forest. Now, when I went to Balcom, I just turned up, and a lorry was coming down the road, and it was the first lorry I see. Richard, it was massive.
Yes.
It was wide. It was wider than, he had to be specially escorted. And on the back was just this one massive bit of metal. It was like a giant, it wasn't a cog, but it was just a giant piece of metal that they were bringing in. And they brought in 18 of those lorries a day to Balcom.
Yes. Well, I lived for a while in northern Canada, northern Alberta. That was before the days of the huge expansion of tar sands, but at that time we were up against the logging industry and the oil industry, and that flaring of sour gas, they call it, and the cut lines through the forest, totally disruptive of ecosystems and of the lives of the people who depend on those ecosystems. And round the Cerrejón mine in Colombia, where I've been more recently and more frequently, again, total disruption. So people's small-scale agriculture utterly pushed to one side, and like you say, huge great roads, huge great trucks pounding through, kicking up dust, messing up people's lungs. So when a mineral extraction project of whatever sort descends on your area, that is really bad news.
I mean, you got like some of these new tactics. One of them was gasification, where they drill down and they set the coal seam on fire.
Yes.
Drilling in the Arctic. They have no shame. They have no boundaries.
No, one of the things that was really bizarre at the annual general meeting last week of BHP Billiton that our friends Hasmin and Beggy had come over to, who you interviewed. Here's a company that is a major producer of oil and coal and is also now into fracking for natural gas. And they were talking about how they accept the science about climate change. They accept that climate change is man-made, that we have to do something about it. Apparently, they say they're a leader in the mining industry in working on climate change. They started caring about it in 1996. They're reducing the greenhouse gas intensity of their operations, which means that that's the amount of greenhouse gases produced for each unit of production. But at the same time, they're increasing their coal and oil and gas production. Well, that's all going to be burnt. That's all going to contribute to climate change. And yet, at the same time, they're saying that they care about.
But they don't,
change.
do they? They're like all the BP, Shell, and they get. I'm the Irish taxi driver. This, my friend, is Richard Solly, and we're going to be right back in 1 minute.